The latest release of Jeffrey Epstein's files has reignited global scrutiny, with some of the most shocking revelations centering on high-profile figures from the UK and the US. Among more than 3 million documents published by the Trump administration, images have emerged that appear to show Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, crouched over an unidentified woman. The identity of the woman remains undisclosed, and the location, date, and context of the photographs are entirely unknown. This release has once again raised uncomfortable questions about judgment, proximity to Epstein, and the institutions that allowed his influence to persist for decades. The prince has previously denied any wrongdoing, and to date has not responded to requests for comment about the new images. The U.S. Department of Justice stated that this batch constitutes the final material to be published under the current law. However, the release underscores an enduring tension: the public's need for clarity and justice versus the practical limitations of legal processes and the protection of victims. Among the 180,000 images disclosed are photographs showing the then Prince Andrew kneeling over and physically interacting with a woman whose identity has been concealed. The lack of contextual information, no dates, no locations, no corroborating evidence, makes interpretation difficult, but the images, combined with the emails and other documents, create a narrative that invites serious questions about judgment and association. Emails dating back to 2010, years after Epstein had already been convicted of sexual offenses involving minors, suggest that Prince Andrew was involved in arranging meetings with a 26-year-old Russian woman in London. In the correspondence, Epstein writes to Andrew, describing the woman as 26, Russian, clever, and beautiful, and inquiring if she might deliver a message. Andrew responds affirmatively, providing his contact details. While nothing in these emails proves criminal activity, the content raises red flags about the company the prince kept and his continued willingness to engage socially with someone whose criminal behavior was widely known. The files also touch upon Peter Mandelson, the former British politician who served as ambassador to Washington until his resignation in 2025. The documents reveal that Epstein financially assisted Mandelson's then-partner, Ronaldo Isla Dilva, by paying $10,000 for an osteopathy course. Mandelson has described his friendship with Epstein as a most terrible mistake and maintains that he was unaware of Epstein's criminal activities. The inclusion of such interactions highlights the breadth of Epstein's influence, stretching into political and social spheres in both the UK and the US. In the US, the files include references to President Donald Trump, though the Justice Department has emphasized that the mentions are largely unverified and incidental. No evidence has emerged suggesting any criminal wrongdoing by Trump in relation to Epstein. Similarly, other American figures appear in the documents, including Bill Gates. An email that was purportedly drafted by Epstein suggested that Gates may have contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Gates has publicly called this claim absurd and false, and there is no evidence to suggest he was involved in any criminal activity. Silicon Valley is not exempt from scrutiny either. Correspondence between Epstein and Elon Musk, the tech billionaire, was also included in the release. In 2012, Musk allegedly asked Epstein, "What day-night will be the wildest party on your island?" while discussing a potential visit to Epstein's Caribbean estate. Musk has denied ever attending Epstein's island or participating in any illegal activity, emphasizing that he had minimal correspondence with Epstein and repeatedly declined invitations. Nevertheless, the emails serve as evidence of Epstein's strategy. He sought proximity not just to established political figures, but to emerging power players in business and technology, ensuring his relevance and influence across multiple spheres. Perhaps most concerning, however, is the impact of these releases on Epstein's victims. Civil rights attorney Gloria Woodward, representing many of Epstein's survivors, expressed outrage at the publication of materials that should have been redacted to protect their identities. Some of them are completely devastated by the fact that the Department of Justice, which was supposed to protect their anonymity, released names of clients who have been Jane Doe for many years, she said. At best, it was a sloppy job. At worst, it smacks of a cover-up. Assistant Attorney General Todd Blanche addressed these concerns during a press conference, suggesting that the release might bring closure to victims. Many advocates, however, disagree, arguing that exposure of survivors' identities re-traumatizes them and erodes the already fragile trust they have in government institutions. The incident underscores a key issue. Transparency cannot come at the expense of victim protection. While the Trump administration asserts that this is the final batch of relevant files, questions remain. The total number of documents reviewed is reported at 6 million, but only 3.5 million have been released. According to the Justice Department, the remainder are either irrelevant, legally confidential, or require additional redactions to safeguard survivors' identities. Critics, however, argue that withholding so many documents feeds suspicions of deliberate obfuscation and potential cover-up, further fueling public skepticism. For Prince Andrew, the implications of these files are primarily reputational rather than legal. The images and emails highlight lapses in judgment, particularly in associating with Epstein after his conviction. Similarly, the revelations about Peter Mandelson, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, while not implying criminal conduct, illustrate the range of social and professional networks Epstein penetrated. The documents collectively offer a picture of a man who leveraged wealth and social influence to gain access to the powerful, manipulate perception, and shield his activities from scrutiny. The files also reveal the operational patterns of Epstein's criminal behavior. Emails and records indicate that he repeatedly recruited young women for sexual activity and sometimes incentivized victims to recruit additional girls. These interactions often involved cash payments and other rewards, creating a cycle of abuse that went largely unchecked for years. While the newly released materials do not introduce additional criminal charges, they shed light on the scale and audacity of Epstein's operations. The unfiled 2007 indictment included in the files highlights one of the most consequential missed opportunities for justice. This draft indictment accused Epstein and 3 unnamed associates of trafficking 19 girls between 2001 and 2005. However, prosecutors ultimately entered into a non-prosecution agreement, allowing Epstein to serve only 13 months in a state prison rather than face federal charges. Documents indicate that authorities at the time considered a broader case, but institutional caution, legal maneuvering, and perhaps the influence of Epstein's network prevented a more thorough prosecution. The psychological and social impact of these revelations cannot be overstated. By circulating images, emails, and records involving high-profile individuals, the files create a sense of normalcy around Epstein's interactions with the elite. They show that even after a conviction for child sex offenses, he continued to cultivate relationships with powerful people across politics, finance, and technology. The files illuminate how access, influence, and strategic networking can sometimes function as shields, deterring scrutiny even in cases of egregious criminal behavior. For survivors, the release is a double-edged sword. While it validates claims about Epstein's reach and patterns of abuse, it also risks re-traumatization through the exposure of their identities. The files highlight the failure of both the criminal justice system and administrative agencies to protect victims fully while striving for transparency. These competing priorities, justice, public knowledge, and victim protection, create a complex ethical landscape in which the release of information is both essential and fraught. Globally, the revelations resonate most strongly in the UK, where the involvement of Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson has attracted intense scrutiny. In the US, public attention has been more focused on President Trump and other domestic figures, though media coverage has been comparatively subdued, possibly due to the sheer scale and complexity of the documents. The release has sparked renewed debate over the role of privilege and power in enabling criminal behavior, emphasizing the need for institutional vigilance and ethical accountability. Even with the vast trove of documents now public, questions remain unanswered. Will additional files eventually be disclosed? Will further legal actions be pursued against any high-profile figures named in the documents? For many, the release is less about immediate prosecution and more about understanding the scope of Epstein's influence and the systemic failures that allowed him to operate unchecked. The files provide a roadmap for future investigation, advocacy, and policy reform, highlighting the structural vulnerabilities in social, political, and legal systems. The Epstein files are not merely a historical archive, they are a contemporary challenge. They force society to confront uncomfortable truths about the interplay between wealth, power, and accountability. They illustrate how even convicted criminals can manipulate social networks to maintain access and influence, and they underscore the ongoing struggle to balance transparency with ethical responsibility toward victims. In the end, the documents paint a disturbing yet instructive picture. They reveal a man who operated with impunity, leveraging charisma, wealth, and connections to evade scrutiny. They reveal institutional failures, missed opportunities for prosecution, and lapses in judgment among those who associated with Epstein. And they expose the ongoing pain and vulnerability of survivors, who must navigate the public disclosure of information that directly impacts their lives. For the public, the files are both a revelation and a warning. They underscore the necessity of oversight, the importance of ethical conduct, and the responsibility of institutions to protect the vulnerable. They also illustrate the dangers of concentrating influence in ways that shield wrongdoing. While the Trump administration claims to have completed the release, the story is far from over. Advocates, journalists, and survivors continue to call for full transparency, accountability, and justice, emphasizing that true closure cannot be achieved solely through documents. It requires societal and institutional reckoning. As this saga unfolds, one fact remains undeniable. Epstein's reach was extraordinary, and the consequences of that reach continue to reverberate across the globe. The files are a stark reminder that transparency without consequence leaves justice incomplete, and that exposure, while necessary, cannot substitute for action. For survivors, investigators, and the public, the Epstein files serve as both evidence and lesson, a record of abuse, privilege, and the urgent need for vigilance. Ultimately, the latest release is a moment of reckoning. It lays bare the complex interplay between criminal behavior, social networks, and institutional inertia. It highlights the enduring challenges in balancing disclosure, privacy, and justice. And it forces the world to confront an uncomfortable reality. Even decades after Epstein's crimes were first revealed, the full measure of accountability remains a work in progress. Perhaps the most lasting impact of these files will be the conversations they ignite about power, privilege, and institutional responsibility. By examining the patterns of behavior revealed, society can begin to ask harder questions about how wealth and influence can insulate wrongdoing. The Epstein files may be historical documents in one sense, but they are living reminders that vigilance, accountability, and reform remain urgent priorities today. Beyond the immediate revelations, the Epstein files also serve as a lens into systemic failures that allowed him to operate for so long. They show not just the audacity of Epstein's criminal network, but also how institutions, from law enforcement to political offices, often deferred or failed to act decisively. Patterns emerge of cautious prosecutors, hesitant investigators, and social elites who tolerated or ignored troubling behavior, creating an environment in which abuse could continue with minimal consequences. The documents also underscore the evolving role of public pressure and media scrutiny in exposing wrongdoing. While Epstein's activities were known in certain circles for years, it is the relentless investigation by journalists, advocates, and legal professionals that has forced the full scope of his operations into the public record. This dynamic demonstrates that accountability rarely emerges spontaneously. It is often the product of persistent oversight, combined with societal insistence that justice be more than symbolic. Equally important is the cautionary message for future policy and reform. The files illustrate how power can shield predators, how legal loopholes can be exploited, and how victim protection can fail if systems prioritize institutional convenience over human dignity. They demand a renewed commitment to safeguarding the vulnerable, strengthening oversight mechanisms, and ensuring transparency is meaningful, not performative. Finally, the Epstein files highlight a sobering truth. Names, images, and emails can shock the public, but the deeper lesson lies in understanding networks, influence, and opportunity. Only by examining these structures can society hope to prevent a repeat of such exploitation, ensuring that exposure leads not merely to fascination, but to concrete, systemic change.